Welcome to a special edition of Wealth Wednesdays. This is the second episode of a national campaign that we're calling Real Estate Reset. I'm Angela Yee, and I'm here with my co-host, Stacy Tisdale. Hey, Stacy.
Hey, Angela. Hi, everybody, and thank you for sharing your time.
All right. Well, we are all about wealth building, and one of the most effective ways to do that is through home ownership. Right now, Black home ownership is at an all-time low. Clearly, we need a real estate reset.
If we're going to bridge the wealth gap between Black and white Americans, we have to close the home ownership gap. On this episode, we'll focus on all those millions of people who have student loan debt. If that includes you or somebody you love, here's a fact you should know right off the top. Just because you have student loans does not mean you can't get a mortgage.
But you do have to be strategic and informed. That's why we partnered with Rocket Mortgage to bring you expert advice, resources, and the support you need to get ready for home ownership, even if you have student loan debt.
Skeptical? Okay, fair enough. But we'd like you to hear from some people who've done it. So meet Johnny and Nicole Bailey. Last year at this time, they had tens of thousands of dollars in student loans. But recently, they made a down payment on a home.
My name is Nicole Bailey. I grew up all over the world. My father was military. So I was in Germany, Virginia, North Carolina, Alaska. I went to undergrad at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro. And now I work in the pharmaceutical industry and research and development.
Hi, my name is Johnny Bailey. I grew up in Petersburg, Virginia. I went to undergrad at Hampton University and got a master's degree from Virginia State University. Currently, I'm an entrepreneur, marketing consultant, and digital coach for Google. This is our daughter, Alexandria. She is 16 months old. She is playful, beautiful, brilliant, and she's a true champion.
Because we were military, we did not own every place that we lived in. Back in about 1996, they did buy a condo at one duty station. My father was at Fort Bragg, and we stayed in that for about 3 years, and then we went overseas to Germany. I think they really tried to guard us from money or making money mistakes, but it seemed to be more of a hindrance because they did not explain enough.
I was raised by my grandmother, so she didn't go to college, and I didn't necessarily have a parent that was advocating for higher education at the time. I figured if I wanted to go to college, I would probably need to get a scholarship. So I played football, basketball, baseball, and I ran track. And by the grace of God, I was lucky enough to earn a scholarship to a few schools. I only had a half scholarship my freshman year, so I did have to take on student loans that year, and that's where my student loan journey began. I probably left Hampton with about $10,000 or $15,000 of student loans. So when I came out of grad school in 2012, I had about $33,000 of student debt.
So once I finished school, I realized that I had maybe $17,000 in undergrad debt. And to me, back then, that was a lot. Now we hear so many more horror stories. Well, anyway, I went to grad school and I did apply for a student loan on my own. And the numbers were pretty high. It was a private grad school degree. And I ended up paying throughout my attendance in grad school and after. So that brings me to a large sum of $60,000 now that I've been trying to pay down. The plan is to up the payments. We are ending our lease here at our apartment, and we just put down a down payment on the house. And with everything being shut down because of COVID, we've decided it would probably be best to move home to my parents' house until the house is ready.
I just didn't feel financially stable enough to pay off my student loans for the first 3 years. When I finally pulled up my student loans account to figure out what I was about to do when I had income, I realized that my credit was trashed. My loans had amassed an extra $20,000 on top of what I actually owed on my principal, and I had work to do. So that was like my awakening in 2017. I had income. I was just like, I need to start paying these loans off. And so it was just minimum payments for the first 2 years. So I decided that I was going to just pay off all my debt as fast as I possibly could. In July, I was officially debt-free.
I'm very excited to buy in DC. I don't think we thought it would come this soon. We've been buried under student debt and planning for the future and trying to get our jobs that we want, the careers that we want. So it's been kind of a struggle the past couple of years. So to finally get on, after being so consistent and following through with our plans, it feels really great to finally get to this point.
We want to congratulate Johnny and Nicole Bailey for all they've accomplished. Congratulations. And we've got some amazing experts coming up to share their advice to help you get on the path to home ownership. Listen, we know it's not easy, but you can do it.
We'll drill down on the question of how student loan debt disproportionately impacts the Black community. But first, let's talk about why. At its core, the student debt gap, like the home ownership gap, is rooted in racist government policies of the 20th century.
After World War II, the GI Bill promised all 16 million returning vets a huge step up in life, with a free college education and a guaranteed low-interest mortgage with no down payment. The idea was to boost the economy and propel millions of working-class GIs into the middle class. It worked beautifully for white vets.
Over the next couple of generations, those white families gained equity, appreciation in the value of their homes, wealth. They used that appreciation, that equity, to send their children to college. They used it to finance their own retirements. They used it to take care of perhaps temporary emergencies, unemployment. And they used it to bequeath wealth to their children and grandchildren, who then had money for down payments for their own homes.
But for all its promise, the GI Bill largely failed African Americans. Black colleges and universities couldn't handle the demand, and most other schools were still segregated. A year after the war, just 46 of 9,000 students at the University of Pennsylvania were Black. Veteran George McLaren had to win a lawsuit just to sit outside the classroom at the University of Oklahoma. And about those great mortgage loans, the FHA prohibited developers from selling homes in their leafy new suburbs to Black people. Most had to remain renters in declining urban areas. Blacks were denied mortgages because banks relied on the government's redlining maps, which declared any neighborhood where Blacks could buy homes too risky for mortgage lending. You can still see the powerful impact of segregation in these modern maps, which find the highest student loan default rates in some of those same neighborhoods.
Poverty must not be a bar to learning, and learning must offer an escape from poverty.
A young Lyndon Johnson taught in a poor school in Texas. As president, he went back there to sign into law the first student loans and Pell Grant program in 1965.
The centerpiece of the law was the Pell Grant, and it was grants, not loans. Grants that covered up to 70% of the average cost of college at a public institution. Today, that's not the case. It covers about 30% now of the cost of college at a public institution. And so making up that gap now for many students are loans.
More than 50 years later, nearly a third of African Americans hold college degrees, but the cost of college has ballooned and keeps growing, and student loan debt has reached crisis levels. Last year, 3 million Black students were enrolled in some form of higher education. By the time they leave, they'll owe, on average, $34,000 in student loan debt. In addition, Blacks are 3 times more likely to fall behind on payments and more than twice as likely to default on their loans. Even more troubling, 20 years after enrollment, the typical African-American borrower still owes 95% of their original student loan debt. This backdrop makes it difficult, if not impossible, for many Black student loan holders to even think about home ownership. How do we have a real estate reset in the community in the face of education debt? Joining us to discuss this are Mark Morial, a longtime civic leader and president of the National Urban League, and philanthropist Robert Smith, founder, chairman, and CEO of Vista Equity Partners. So Mark, you've been a champion of housing finance reform for a really long time. I recall your home buyer bill of rights after the housing crisis. How can we even begin to think about closing the housing gap without looking at the student loan debt crisis in the community?
In truth, you cannot deal with it comprehensively unless you deal with student debt, unless you deal with depressed earnings, unless you deal with the fact that we've got not enough supply in the housing market. All of these problems speak to the need for comprehensive solutions to help people raise their earnings, to get student debt under control, to help people save and put money aside, and to make housing more affordable.
So Robert, please weigh in on this as well. What are your thoughts on the role that student loan debt is playing in the housing gap?
Probably one of the most important is just the income and wealth disparity between Black Americans and white Americans is large, and it's actually increasing. And one of the challenges is the undue burden that our students have to bear in student loan debt. 65% of African-American wealth is actually consumed by the servicing of student loan debt. And if the majority of your income is being used to service debt, then it decreases your ability to actually embrace the opportunity to create wealth for your family.
And you absolutely stunned Morehouse College's class of 2019 and the world by paying off the entire class's student loan debt bill to the tune of $34 million. Let's have a look.
And my family is making a grant to eliminate their student loans. Now, I know my class will make sure they pay this forward. And I want my class to look at these alumnus, these beautiful Morehouse brothers, and let's make sure every class has the same opportunity going forward.
And Robert, a small portion of that donation was set aside to support research on how debt relief influences the economic and professional lives of graduates. What would systemic debt relief even look like?
We have a number of initiatives that we are trying, one of which is with our Student Freedom Initiative, we can talk about a bit later, is to give our community more access to opportunity. I always think about it, people say, oh, you stunned the Morehouse class. Well, I think about it as liberating 400 families and 400 young eagles to some extent to go out and now, to seize the opportunity of capitalism, to become entrepreneurs, to actually go and teach in their communities, to become doctors, to become engineers, scientists that can actually contribute back to their economy and to build wealth at the same time, which is something that has been forestalled because of the burden that they would unduly have upon graduation.
Now, Mark, I would love for you to also weigh in on this. What would systemic student loan debt relief look like?
I think we need, one, a complete reset. Part of the reset is to help young people get rid of these student loans, and part of the reset is to create a better system of college affordability here in the United States. I like a dramatic expansion of the Pell Grant so that it's a needs-based, if you will, instrument to help people, whether they choose to go to a public university or a private university or a community college or a technical and trade school. We have to recognize that the competitive advantage of the United States throughout history has been a human capital advantage. It's been in the power and the ability and the intelligence and the ingenuity of all of our people.
Mark, I completely agree with you. I definitely went through those same struggles when I graduated from college and had student loan debt. I feel like it wasn't even a conversation back then. So now it's a lot more of a conversation, unless I missed it. But I also was recently reading an article where you said, quote, when we are trying to build a bigger economy, we need people in the lower half. Is it everybody's problem if Black people continue to be shut out of wealth building through avenues like home ownership? Let's put it into context, the role that economic equality should play in our current discussions about social justice.
So I'll take that question and I'll answer it this way. There are numerous studies, including a study by McKinsey, which indicates that elimination of income inequality, the substantial reduction in poverty would mean a growth of some 3 to 4 trillion in our overall GDP. GDP, which is now at about 18 trillion. It's probably down because of the pandemic a year. So growing the ability of people in the bottom half of the economy to spend, to invest in necessities of life, food, clothing, shelter, medicines, etc., has a stimulative effect on the economy.
Robert, let's face it, it's going to take a village, public sector, private sector, and self-empowerment to prepare Blacks struggling with student loans for home ownership. You're doing even more than you've done with a new initiative called the Student Freedom Initiative. Please tell us about that.
What the Student Freedom Initiative is designed to do is to target juniors and seniors at HBCUs who are studying STEM. They can then borrow from this pool of capital. And in borrowing from this pool of capital, if they decide and they go work at, some of the companies like mine or Microsoft or Google or any of these higher paying jobs, they actually pay back the money. It's still lower than a Parent Plus loan over a longer period of time. Or if they decide to go work in the communities and make less money and become a teacher, they pay back much less over longer periods of time. But the money doesn't go, quote unquote, to the government or to an investor. It actually goes back into the pool of capital that gets recycled and regenerated now for the next generations of African-American students coming from these HBCUs or MSIs, minority oriented programs in colleges, so that creates a funding mechanism, a self-sustaining funding mechanism. And so we've now funded this with the first $50 million from the Fund 2 Foundation. We're going to raise an additional $450 million. So at $500 million, it becomes a self-sustaining process such that every student, STEM student from an HBCU or MSI can utilize this program and graduate in perpetuity. So in other words, this is a system that is self-sustaining in perpetuity, and we can graduate literally tens of thousands of students a year, and they're basically paying it forward.
Here is what happens when you do pay it forward. Let's take a listen to Jonathan Epps, the co-valedictorian of the Morehouse class of 2019.
In terms of home ownership, in terms of grad school, Mr. Smith's gift got us off to just a tremendous financial footing that a lot of our peers, especially peers who look like us, don't have. Homes are expensive. They require a significant investment in capital, and Mr. Smith's gift just gave us the liberty to make that decision without the burden of student debt, and I just can't thank him enough.
Robert, how does it make you feel when you hear that the students that you touched with that gesture are able to do things like think about home ownership? They're able to think about furthering their education. They're able to provide support for their families.
It tells me that they are centered. They understand what this gift is, and they understand their responsibility.
And Robert, just shifting gears, a new McKinsey study shows the digital divide that exists between Black and white communities regarding access to computers and the internet. And it found that 12% of Blacks do not have access to computers at home, 25% have no access to high-speed internet at home, meaning they can't even take advantage of things like online mortgage companies, even though that we see research that those things help reduce discrimination and lower rates. What can we do to close that digital divide?
We actually kind of reverse engineered the problem with our company, looked at every single school district, because we provide learning management systems and solutions for school districts, and then juxtapose that with where the broadband coverage areas where there are gaps. So now we have 13,000 school districts all ranked. What percentage of their students African-American, what percentage or Latinx, and what percentage do not have broadband access, and what percentage of those students don't actually have devices. We've now partnered with Verizon, AT&T, Dell, Michael Dell and his team, Eric Schmidt and his team, and now have come up with the ranking system and know exactly those communities, exactly those school districts, exactly those states, and even this week are now sharing that information with not just the broadband providers, but also the local representatives and congressmen and women in those areas. And hopefully we can get some of our elected officials in Washington to make these sort of initiatives part of the infrastructure bill.
And Mark, final pearls of wisdom, if you would, for people out there who want to be homeowners but struggle with student loan debt.
Well, first of all, believe that you can be a homeowner. You may not be able to afford the house you absolutely want, but you can find something you can own. And number two, owning is better than renting. Owning is superior to renting, but you've got to be smart. Don't fall in love with property, the first property you see. Research, study, and if you will, take advantage of an organization like ours that provides homebuyer education classes. Homeownership counseling is what it's called. We help you prepare a budget. We help you analyze what size house you can in fact afford. We help you analyze mortgage products. So that work, which we are proud of, we do to the tune of some 30 to 40,000 cases a year. It's housing counseling. The National Urban League offers it. If you want to know if it's offered in your neighborhood or in your community, go to nul.org and check us out.
Mark Morial, civic leader and president of the National Urban League, and philanthropist Robert F. Smith, founder, chairman, and CEO of Vista Equity Partners. Thank you both so much for sharing your time with us.
My name is Frank Lawrence Jr. I am a 2019 graduate of Morehouse College, and I am also a Robert F. Smith Scholar. First of all, I would like to say I'm extremely thankful that someone of Mr. Smith's caliber would make such a contribution to my future. Prior to his gift, I had no idea how I would pay off $65,000 in loans.
We know that buying a home can be incredibly stressful. And when you're carrying the burden of student loans, it's especially tough. So we're going to spend some time learning how to manage the toll that this kind of stress takes on your psychological and physical well-being. First, meet Chastity and Sherelle Phelps, two sisters with good jobs, mortgages, and a whole lot of student loan debt.
Sisters Chastity and Sherelle Phelps grew up in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, with no doubt that they would go to college.
The choice wasn't there as to whether you were going to go to school, because if you were going to be gainfully employed, this was going to be a requirement of employers.
It was the ticket in the door of most career paths and of any that I was interested in.
Sherelle hoped to be a broadcaster, but graduated college in 2008, just as the economy fell into recession. So she went back for a master's degree and found her true calling as a teacher.
The feeling that I got once I got in that classroom, I'm walking in my purpose. We can figure out what the right answer is and why it was the right answer.
I followed all the rules. I did everything the right way. And I am paying for it now. My student loan debt is north of $100,000. And to be quite honest with you, I do not know the exact amount right now because, and this is kind of embarrassing to admit, but sometimes I'm just too scared to look.
Honestly, I have north of $180,000, and you took the words right out of my mouth. One of the very reasons I don't know the precise number is because it's frightening to me.
Scholarships paid for Chastity's undergraduate degree. The debt came from loans for law school and then a PhD. She now teaches at the college level and hopes to be a professor one day. In hindsight, both women say they did not truly understand the consequences of the debt when they were borrowing it, how it would balloon with interest, and how much it would impede them later in life.
We were told, if you can't afford to go, just take these loans out. It's good debt. Yes, debt, but it's good debt.
If you do this now, it'll pay off in the long run. Well, we're in the long run.
The good news is both sisters managed to purchase modest homes in spite of their student loans. But even with excellent credit and good relationships with their local banks, it took a lot of convincing.
I was able to prove to them, okay, I know that my student loan debt is reporting that I have this much, and I know it looks overwhelming, but I am on these income-based repayment plans, and so slowly but surely that amount that they were able to qualify me for went up. And that was also with them having to get the actual president of the local bank to sign off on that as well. So it was no easy feat at all.
Chastity had a similar experience buying her home. Now, both women feel shut out of other milestones of life, like saving for retirement or even planning for a family.
You can't even accept an engagement proposal without fearing that the guy's gonna run once he sees what you owe in student loan debt. This is a real issue.
And I can't go to sleep. I can't.
There isn't anything I would trade for the knowledge that I've gained, but at the same time, I do wonder about what life would have been if I didn't have the stress of this debt.
It's like the monster that just won't disappear. It won't go away.
Thanks to Chastity and Sherelle for sharing their stories. We know a lot of what they're experiencing resonates for Team Wealth Wednesdays. So we're going to turn now to two women who can help us all stay grounded through stressful times. First, we're joined by financial behaviorist and founder of Sterling Capital, Jaquette Timmons. And Dr. Janet Taylor is a psychiatrist and life coach who specializes in stress management and work-life balance. Welcome to you both. Janet, a study by the Money and Mental Health Policy Institute found that 86% of respondents said their financial situation had made their mental health worse. 39% said their mental health left them unable to even remember what they had been told about a loan. Psychological unrest and anxiety can lead to bad financial decisions and behavior. How do people living with these stressors mitigate student loan debt stress and the pressure to achieve financial goals like owning a home?
So to achieve financial goals, it's really important that you understand how our brains are working during this time where we have COVID unrest, racial reckoning, racial unrest. When things are uncertain, our lizard brain, which is at the back, the third part of the back of our brain, is where fight, flight, and freeze comes in. And so when there's something that's confusing, there's something uncertain, our brain is like, you better do something. And so that's where many of us operate from, where we'll make rash decisions. It makes us more difficult to concentrate, to focus, and to remember, as the study showed. So it's important to slow down. When you're uncertain, the best thing that you can do is find the facts. Make a budget, look at how much you have coming in, consult money managers, and really have a plan so that you realize that you are getting factual information to make a decision from. And then that can help you ride this wave, which unfortunately I think will be around for a little bit in terms of uncertainty. But recognize when you feel uncertain, when you're feeling anxious, just to take a breath, slow down, and as much as you can, use facts to guide your decisions.
Jaquette, I saw you nodding your head. Did you also want to weigh in on what Janet had to say?
The counsel about slowing down is really, really important. And, to me, it reminds me of when you're rushing because you're running late and you're running to get out of the door and you realize you've forgotten something. And anytime that you're rushing, whether it's because you're running late or just the stress that your body feels whenever you are tense, the counterintuitive thing is to slow down. So the point that Dr. Taylor was making is so, so, so important. And the whole idea of, taking a deep breath before you are about to make a decision, especially a financial decision, is so critical. And it's so critical because it allows you to pause for a moment and to make sure that you are making decisions from a place of clarity, as opposed to a space of being really tensed and perhaps maybe even a little confused. And I think that part of the challenge is that, especially right now, people are craving certainty. But the reality is, whether we're living in a pandemic or not, there is no certainty. And what we ought to be prioritizing is actually clarity, looking for clarity around what is the very next best step to take.
I'm glad you said that. I just took a few deep breaths right while you guys were both talking. Now, Jaquette, what are some of the financial steps that people can take to help them address student loan debt and feel like they're getting this part of their finances under control at least?
I think one of the major habits to have is to track your money. And often when people hear me say that, they think that I am making that suggestion for the purposes of creating a budget, but that's actually not why. I have the mindset that you can't interrupt a pattern that you don't notice. And when you track your money, you put yourself in a position of A, collecting data, B, reviewing that data so that you can see patterns, and then from that, make decisions that are tied to what is that data illuminating for you with regards to your behavior. So as it pertains to your student loan, when you track your money, you might be able to identify an extra $5, $10, $20, $50, $100 that you may not have noticed if you were not tracking. And, you know, with my coaching clients, I often give them the advice of doing an exercise that I call roll call. And with roll call, what I'm asking them to do is take a look at their banking statements and their credit card statements, and to just focus on the expense items, and to highlight those purchases that made you happy, highlight those purchases that are mandatory, and then highlight in a different color or a notation those purchases that maybe made you happy when you made them, but now that it's 30, 60, or maybe even 90 days later that you're reviewing the statement, you would now make them a regret or an R. And the reason I ask people to do that is, especially when you're looking for quote unquote extra money, which really just comes from the money that you have right now, it is so much easier to cut back on those things that you quote unquote regret versus cutting back on those things that actually bring you joy and make you happy.
Janet, roll call, and also I want to talk a little bit about conditioning. Now, as we've discussed many times, race and culture play a role in our beliefs about money. And there is an element of cultural conditioning in our financial behavior in the Black culture that education is the way out and worth a big financial sacrifice. But how important is it for us to understand that about ourselves when we figure out what we should do about financial decisions like student loans and mortgages?
We value education, but what really burdens us is debt. And so, you know, as you guys focus on your show, I mean, the wealth gap goes back 400 years. So I think we really have to strip whatever myth and preconception we had about what we can achieve, what we can save, and start all over again. I have never met a Black parent or a brown parent that didn't want the best education for their kids or didn't want the best for them. The number one group of people who are unemployed right now are people who do not have a college education. So we just have to keep pushing education and reasonable ways that our kids can go to school and not come out in debt, because it's dire in terms of the education gap for people.
And Jacat, I want you to weigh in on this too. So in addition, what I'm talking about is, for example, I have a white male friend who is in the hedge fund industry. He makes 7 figures a year, yet he just moved to a neighborhood that had good public schools because he simply refuses to pay private school prices. Whereas I know my parents, I know a lot of Black families, they will sacrifice. You even hear people doing things like tapping into retirement because of that belief, really in our culture, very deeply embedded. Education is everything, spend everything. And I know that comes into play when people are taking out student loans as well. So how important is it that we be mindful of the fact, oh, that little voice in my head to spend everything on education, it might not actually serve me in my financial outcomes?
I think that the challenge becomes when you, for example, are majoring in a particular discipline, and just for illustrative purposes, you take out a $100,000 student loan, but the income that you could potentially, earn from that discipline isn't anywhere near going to put you in a position where you could pay that off. I think that is more of the challenge. And I think that's when people need to have some really honest, come to Jesus moments and conversations with themselves around what is it that you're really interested in studying? What is that going to lead to in terms of your profession? And will that profession put you in a position where you can pay that student loan back and, as importantly, pay it back with ease?
I think we need to look at ways where we can go to college and not end up with these big loans because we think we have to go to a school that is going to place us somewhere where, in fact, if you went to a state college or even a community college or work somewhere in some place that helped you go to school, maybe we could walk away with less debt and still come out with the job that we want. And I think, just as Black people right now in America, we have to look at all those factors.
Now, Jaquette, I have a question for you. As a financial behaviorist, what should people consider so that they can make the best financial decisions about when to buy a home when balancing student loan debt?
When it comes to trying to balance the trade-off, do I focus on paying off the student loan debt, or do I, purchase a home and take on a mortgage? One of the scenarios that I would look at, and I'm also a big fan of scenario planning, I would suggest taking a look at, well, what would, the option be if you brought your outstanding student loan debt down 50% from where it is now, and use that as the metric for when you will actually go and take a mortgage. Or if you are indeed, committed to doing both of them right now, maybe it's the trade-off of you don't buy your absolute dream home right now, you buy the next level beneath that, or you move into a neighborhood that maybe also isn't your dream neighborhood, but it gives you the opportunity to start the process of being a homeowner.
All right. Well, Dr. Janet Taylor, thank you so much. And Jaquette Timmons, thank you both so much for all of your really great insights and your advice for our Real Estate Reset community. I think it was really beneficial for us today. Home Free USA founder and president Marcia Griffin once said, quote, "My life's purpose is to financially enrich the lives of American families by giving them the information, inspiration, and motivation they need to sustain homeownership and lifelong financial security," end quote. Live out her purpose, she has. For nearly 25 years, Home Free USA has been on the front lines, mentoring would-be home buyers through their own financial challenges and getting them to a point where they could be approved for a mortgage. Currently serving 4.5 million consumers, Real Estate Reset is happy to welcome Marcia Griffin. Marcia, so many people are struggling with student loan debt and they don't understand how their loans work or how they impact their ability to get a mortgage. And they certainly don't know that there's people like you out there. Why did you feel moved to offer a helping hand to people when it comes to getting a mortgage? And why is that kind of support important?
First of all, Home for USA, which is a nonprofit that I started some 26 years ago, the reality is that homeownership is the foundation of wealth, particularly for African Americans and really for everyone. And so as we look at how, particularly today, as we look at how we're going to accumulate wealth and have economic equity, we really need to look at some of the things that's holding us back. One, of course, student loan debt, debt in general. But student loan debt is serious. A lot of folks don't even know how much they owe for student loans. I just encourage you. We've got a note here at the bottom. You need to register. Go to the student loan registration that's noted below and find out how much you owe. Most people are shocked.
Marcia, let's stay with the student loan debt side of the mortgage student loan debt conversation for a moment. You say that step one is people should be really mindful of the amount of student loan debt they're taking out in the first place.
What we find in working with students in particular, that students are using student loan debt to send money to the mother and father and all of that. So that we have to be mindful that student loans, this is not a gift. This is a debt. And everybody that you go to borrow money, when you want to elevate your life financially, they're going to be looking at your credit report, your credit score, and your debt. So that is critical.
And Marcia, what's so ironic here is that debt and credit can even impact your ability to get a job, making all of that debt you took in student loans a big hindrance to your ability to earn your way out of that. Can you explain that for our audience? Because many people don't realize that employers look at your credit history to determine if you would be a trustworthy employee and if they're even going to hire you.
Absolutely. This is the whole issue of money debt and finances, student loans, credit reports, credit scores. This is critical to our community and critical to our financial survival. Now, why do they look at your credit report? Because they're in their minds, whether right or wrong, they're thinking, well, if the person has a good credit score, which is just a compilation of all your credit added together, and that goes from 350 to 850. If you have a credit score that's 400 and they see this, and of course the student loans is a part of this, they're going to think, well, this person doesn't pay anyone. This person, they rip me off. You know, this person is not a strong employee. And this is something that we have to work on, getting help around our credit score, around our credit, our student loans and all sorts of debt. Guys, this is a good thing. It's not a bad thing. And this is something that if we want to progress, if we want to move forward in life, we got to get it together.
Marcia, we do want to give a shout out to all of the people watching from the HBCU community. Home Free USA does have a special initiative for HBCUs that aims to build character along with financial wellness. So please tell us about that.
Well, we're very, very proud of our Center for Financial Advancement. Look, we need to develop our Black leaders of tomorrow. And the Black leaders of tomorrow will be approved homeowners, and they're going to rock and roll to help to change our community. CFA, our Center for Financial Advancement, right now is in 7 HBCUs, will be in 11 HBCUs at the end of this school year. We have students who we wrap our arms around to find jobs and internships. And the thing that we want everyone to know is that, look, you can be an A+ student, but you need to have some other attributes. Professional development, you need to be able to sell yourself. People need to want to hire you. I don't care how smart you are. These are the kinds of things that we teach and preach in a CFA. And at some point in a couple of years, we're going to be at every HBCU, because our job with guys like you all is to really show the power of our people coming from HBCUs, and they are powerful, they are smart, they are brilliant, and they are about business.
And a really big shout out to the HBCU community. Marcia Griffin, founder of Home Free USA, I want to thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate you.
So much of home ownership comes down to preparation. And that means, among other things, having a credit rating that will allow you to get a mortgage. But how do you manage your credit when you're carrying student loan debt? There is probably nobody who knows more about credit and wealth building than John Hope Bryant. He is the chairman, CEO, and founder of Operation Hope, the world's largest financial empowerment and education organization. And John also has a new book coming out on October 6th called Up From Nothing. John, we are very excited to have you here, and thank you so much for sharing your time.
I'm honored to be with you. You're a pioneer in these times, not only for women and for minorities, but for all people who are looking for financial freedom. And I'm honored to share this moment with you. Let's go.
Let's totally go. So how big a role, John, is student loan debt playing in the housing gap between Blacks and whites?
Well, it's a huge gap. It's a huge role it's playing, because essentially it's the same amount as credit card debt cumulatively as a statistical number, but that doesn't really, I think, answer it. The answer is it's this generation's mortgage. Your student loan debt is what you would have spent on the home that would have become the foundation of your wealth building exercise. Here's the good news though. The education that is underneath the student loan debt, just make you feel better about it, will actually pay a dividend and appreciate.
Interesting. To stay with that point, I want you to respond to this statement from one of our guests. She said that we were taught that student loans are debt, but that they're good debt. But in this day and age, when you hear stories of people being saddled with hundreds of thousands of dollars of student loans for a lifetime and having a negative impact on things like home ownership, are they still good debt?
Yes, because we live in a knowledge economy. I mean, we've made dumb sexy in this country for the last 20 years, Stacey. We've dumbed down and celebrated it almost. and China is beginning to eat our lunch. And other nations that are African continent that are obsessing about education is eating our lunch. I think education needs to be seen as a public good, that when you invest in that in society, it pays dividends in GDP and growth for the whole society. But until that day comes, the answer to the question is yes, it's still good debt. Financing jewelry, bling is bad debt. Buying a car and paying 18% interest rate on a car or a Mercedes, where it becomes not a Mercedes, but Mercedes payments, that's bad debt because that's a depreciating asset. It depreciates over time. But education appreciates over time. A home appreciates over time.
John, one of our viewers from our first Real Estate Reset episode on YouTube asks, so despite having lower inventory and having to deal harder for a home, it's still a buyer's market? John, is it still a buyer's market? Because when we first spoke with you before, we were in the middle of the CARES Act. The coronavirus is still not under control, but Washington has not come up with more federal stimulus. They have extended some help for federal student loan holders. They can suspend their payments if they need to, and those who do pay don't have to pay interest until December 31st. What should loan holders be doing with this opportunity? What do you expect to see out of Washington?
You know, the stimulus is mixed up in partisan politics and a presidential election year. That's why you haven't seen part two. Keep in mind, by the way, there's still $100 billion left in part one. $100 billion is still a lot of money. And so folks should try to figure out how that's being reallocated and reassigned right now. There's still city programs, state programs, county and federal programs that they can access. By the way, call one of our Hope Financial coaches at Operation Hope. The coaching and counseling is free. Or go to our Hope in Hand app, or call our 1-800 number, or go to our website.
We hear so many stories about people not understanding what happened to their loans. Financial literacy seems to be playing a big role here. The struggle that all Americans are having, but particularly Black Americans. So how big a role is it playing? What can people do if they're trying to navigate the complexities of student loans, some just 17 years old? How can they learn how they work and how they can best navigate them?
This is like breathing. Financial literacy and understanding your money is like breathing now. It's critically important. And they need to call again, Operation Hope, go online. This internet, this just generation of young people, go to the app store and don't download the hip hop video, download the Hope in Hand app, okay? And get an appointment. You can do it digitally, and we can talk to you by text, by email, by voice, by phone, by video, and help you get on the right path. I cannot stress this enough.
John Hope Bryant, Chairman and CEO of Operation Hope, the world's largest financial empowerment and education organization. Thank you so much for joining us. And we will be looking out for your new book, Up From Nothing, in October.
Let's turn now to a finance specialist who not only has professional expertise, she has personal experience with paying for college. One child is getting ready to go, one is in college, and one recently graduated. Lynette Cox is an entrepreneur who, along with her husband, runs themoneycoach.net.
I think the number one thing that most folks don't know about their student loans is that there really are a variety of programs that they can enter into in order to achieve an affordable repayment. And so, for example, you have the standard loan repayment program, which puts you on a 10-year repayment plan. Some folks, that might work just fine, but that typically is the highest monthly payment. So if that really doesn't work for you, there's several other programs as well. There's the graduated loan repayment program. There's the extended loan repayment program. There are income-based or income contingent options. You just have to explain your circumstances. You just have to apply and try to work out a deal. The most liberal of programs let you make 120 payments or 10 years worth of payments under a variety of means and get loan forgiveness or cancellation. So typically it's for cops, firefighters, social workers, things of that nature. The challenge is if you miss one payment or if something happened, they can say, nope, you no longer qualify. In general though, for folks who are thinking about income-based repayments or income contingent repayments, yes, it's typically the case that you're going to pay for about 20 years. And then after 20 or 25 years, then the remaining balance is canceled or wiped out. Now, some people are like, 20, 25 years, that's a lot. It's better than 30 years, or it's better than paying forever. Consider asking your employer, either your current employer or a prospective employer, to help you pay off the student loans. And honestly, this isn't a terribly novel concept. It's simply a perk, a fringe benefit of employment that a lot of employers are doing this as a benefit to their employees. If you work for a federal government agency, and it could be located anywhere in the country, you can qualify for a payment program where the government, your employer, will actually repay your student loan debt. In a nutshell, it's up to a maximum of $60,000, $10,000 per year over a 6-year period. And the qualifying factor is that you have to agree to stay with that employer afterwards for a certain time, typically another year, 2 or 3 years down the road. If you're struggling with student loan debt, you've got to think creatively about other ways to pay it off outside of your normal salary. Maybe you'll get an income tax refund check, put that towards the loan. Maybe you can sell stuff that you don't need, whether that's electronics, household goods, or that second car. Maybe you're going to do something creative like get a second income or a side hustle, a part-time job. Whatever it is you can do to raise some extra money, relocating, getting a roommate, all of those things can help you to reduce that college debt. You should always have a game plan when you're going into the process, because here's essentially what happens. So the student takes out, $5,000 per year, $20,000 by the end of their senior year. The kid gets out of school and thinks, okay, now I've got to repay student loans to the tune of $20,000. That's not correct. What's happened is there's been interest that's been accruing on the loans from day one. Now that $20,000 balance is more like $27,000 or so. It's not too late to get in through the end of the year, through December 2020. You don't have to make payments. And they did something that was really nice for borrowers. They set the interest rate to 0, so you don't have to worry about interest accruing or being capitalized, that is added to your student loan balances. So it's not too late if you need to put a pause on those payments.
If you're concerned about racial discrimination as you consider applying for a mortgage, here's an interesting fact. Online financial technology companies discriminate 40% less than loan officers who make decisions face-to-face. That's according to the National Bureau of Economic Research. FinTech seems to be providing solutions to discriminatory lending practices that the government and private sector struggle with. Joining us to discuss this and ways you can prepare yourself for home ownership despite student loans is Tony Knuckles, Regional Vice President of Mortgage Banking at Rocket Mortgage. Tony, thank you for joining us. And let's start with FinTech. We know that Blacks face discriminatory hurdles when it comes to borrowing, mortgages certainly being no exception. Is technology proving to be a great equalizer?
First, Stacy, thank you for having me. And I do believe technology is playing a major factor in closing the gap when it comes to discrimination. Specifically, our Rocket Mortgage experience, we leverage data, and that eliminates a lot of the biases that you may or others may have experienced in the past.
You've told me that it's important for the Black community to change their own narrative and empower themselves. Please share your thoughts on this.
I shared it with you because I truly believe it, Stacy. I think we need to change the narrative and really do a better job educating our people. So, oftentimes there's a few that have the understanding and depth of knowledge. However, we don't get it out to the masses. So I think we have to take responsibility for a lot of things, taking responsibility for our credit, our ability to repay on the debts that we take on. But more importantly, we have to look at financial health, just like we look at physical and mental health. And so when we take out student loans, we have to pay them back and have the ability to pay them back by finding jobs that allow us to earn enough so that we can do that in a timely fashion to get us in a position where we are eligible for loans similar to mortgages. So, there's a saying I often say is it's learn, go to school, educate yourself, and then earn and then return, give it back to the community so those who come after you have a better opportunity to experience the American dream, i.e. home ownership.
Can you elaborate a little more about refinancing? I think that's an option that many of our community could benefit from but need to know more about.
So when I think of refinancing, I'm thinking of there's homeowners today that could benefit from taking a lower interest rate potentially or shortening the term to pay lower interest on their home loan. The same thing can be said for student loans. With interest rates as low as they are, it may make sense for a borrower to look at other options. By dropping your interest rate, you can considerably drop the amount of interest you pay over the lifetime of those student loans, and you can lower your overall monthly obligations. So that puts you in a position to become more credit worthy when it comes to obtaining a loan. Now, you know, Stacy, the numbers in our community are vastly different. I know we shared something around 80% of African Americans that take out student loans still have those loans historically over a 20-year time period. And refinancing is an option that might be able to shorten that term.
And just staying on that topic, I know it's just going to mean a lot to our audience. Where do they begin? What should someone do if they want to refinance their student loan?
Well, I think you have to research and find out, one, start with the provider that you're currently working with. You also may want to look at credit unions. There's also private institutions out there that offer alternatives for people looking to refinance their student loans. However, in my specific field, I always believe that preparation creates the separation. So before you get into any type of loan, it's important to know what you're getting into. Read all of the documents, know the facts, not just when you sign the documents, but what you're going to be obligated to on the back end.
Bigger picture, how big a role does the housing gap play in the overall wealth gap, and why is this an important issue for Rocket?
You know, I think it's important as, you know, an organization, we absolutely want to do right by our team members and the folks that we serve in the communities that we live, work, and play. And so for us, one of the big issues of the day is this wealth gap, and it is real. And so if you think about it for a moment, Stacy, because Black home ownership is less, Blacks historically don't experience the appreciation that others have done. So that helps widen that gap. And that's not a good thing. We want to close that gap. And I believe through education, training, resources such as what Quicken Loans, Rocket Mortgage, and Home for USA provide, it can put people in a position to become mortgage ready and close that gap. We know that for many, many years, it has been the American dream known as home ownership for a reason. And we just haven't had the access. Well, today with FinTech resources such as Rocket Mortgage, we can level that playing field and get people to open up the door to home ownership.
Tony Knuckles, Regional Vice President of Mortgage Banking at Rocket Mortgage. We appreciate your insights.
So I was talking to Stacy about things that I started doing because truthfully, I only recently started making money. I've always been like in debt since I was in college. You know, I had the student loans, I had all those credit cards that they get you to sign up for when you can't afford to pay for it. So when I graduated from school, I was working these jobs, not making a lot of money, but I've been educating myself a lot. The first thing I did when I got a job that actually paid a decent salary was pay off all of my credit card bills. And then I said, I need to buy a house. And so I did buy a house in Bed-Stuy in Brooklyn, which was a lot for me because it was really me educating myself on how to get a mortgage, how to get pre-approved, how to not to have to pay a PMI, but it was all things that I didn't know anything about that I really had to educate myself on. So now I always tell people, because I go on the radio, I talk about it, people hit me up, and I try to give other people advice because I know it's not an easy thing to do.
And that, of course, is Angela at an event I created several years ago in New York called Black Women, Feminism, and Empowerment. And if you saw our first episode of Real Estate Reset, you already know that Angela owns a number of properties. But what you probably don't know is how she managed to do it while still paying off her student loans. One thing I can tell you about my co-host is that we can learn a lot from the choices she's made in her financial life and wealth building. I'm so proud of you, Angela. And I remember you telling me stories about being in debt and not wanting to open bills. What was that time in your life like? And what did you learn from it?
That was a really stressful time in my life. Just imagine, like, I wasn't getting anything fun or nice in the mail. All I was getting were these bills. And I just knew I didn't have the money to pay them. I was really living under paycheck to paycheck. And the one thing I always made sure that I did pay was my rent, because I wasn't trying to get kicked out and my landlord lived downstairs. But when it came to those bills, I just was avoiding it, and my credit was terrible. So it was just something that always had me really paranoid, had me a little stressed out. And finally, I said, okay, I have to deal with this. I wanted to make sure that I got my credit score up. I wanted to be able to lease a car on my own. I had an apartment, but my dad had to co-sign it for me. So it was just a lot of issues that I was going through. And finally, I said, okay, let me make these calls. Let me transfer some of my debt to a credit card that actually had no interest for a period of time. And let me address this. I went to my student loans and I deferred them. That was something I should have done a long time ago. And I did. After that, I started making more money because I realized that I wasn't going to be able to cut it with the amount of money that I was making. So I got some side hustles. That's how the whole side hustles gig started for me. And I started to address that. And it was really a great feeling seeing some of those. I started paying off my highest interest credit cards first. And so it was nice to see those bills go down and see my credit score go up.
How did you get interested in real estate as an investment in a wealth building opportunity?
So the first property that I bought was in Brooklyn, in Bed-Stuy. And truthfully, my best friend bought a house. And I was like, okay, she bought a house. I have to get on my game and buy a house as well. She used to be my roommate. And so when she bought a house and I went through the process with her, it really helped me know what I needed. I knew what to look for. And I started learning how to obtain a mortgage. I started building up my credit. I got a car that I leased on my own. And that was important because then I knew my credit was good enough for me to be able to lease a car. So I felt like, okay, now I can actually think about buying a home. Then I started saving money. I started working these jobs and being able to have actually some money in the bank. So I set a goal for myself. And I know in the past, I was not the most responsible person when it came to my money, but I started saving for something. And that actually made me feel good that I could make sacrifices knowing that I had a bigger plan in my head. And so the first property that I bought was actually a 2-family house, this house right here. And I bought this house about 6.5 years ago. And it was big for me because the way I looked at it was I put the money down on the house, but I also have a tenant, and that tenant actually helps to pay for the mortgage. And what I pay for my mortgage with the tenant also chipping in is less than what I would be paying for rent. And so that was a good feeling. It was just coming up with that down payment. And once I came up with that down payment and saved for that, it felt really great to be someplace that I know I would own.
And I know one of your houses in Detroit only cost you $1,000. How did that happen?
Right. So in Detroit, and I know they have this in a lot of cities, they have the land bank. And with the land bank, you can actually bid on houses online. And so they will have 2 properties a day that go on for sale on the auction. And they start at $1,000. And this house in particular, we were watching it, and it went up for sale. And all day long, nobody really bid on it. I don't know if people weren't paying attention, but it was in a good neighborhood. And we managed to get it for $1,000 and then rehabbed the property and sold it.
I'm writing that down, the land bank. Checking that out. And how many properties do you have now?
So after selling that property in Detroit, I still have 2 more. And in Brooklyn, I have 3. So just think about it. Only 6.5 years ago was the first house I bought. And now here we are, a little more than 6 years later. And I own 5 properties right now.
I also want you to share with our audience how home ownership has been for you as an investment, we've heard great, and also how it's been in terms of giving you a sense of financial security.
Right. I actually paid off this house. And I did that as a birthday gift to myself. And people told me not to do that. And it's really important to understand your own self and what makes you feel secure financially. And so it was something that made me feel secure. And I'm really glad that I did it, because during this time, I haven't had to worry about paying a mortgage. And then now I was able to invest into another home knowing that this is all paid off. And so that's something that gives me peace of mind. Other people invest differently.
That is my girl. And Angela, you're an inspiration and a role model to all of us. We're going to keep the conversation going about working women and home ownership. Next month on Real Estate Reset, we'll have a very special surprise guest host who will remind us of all of the treasure Black women carry on the inside as we help them build wealth on the outside through home ownership. We're calling it Wealth Wednesdays She Sheds. That's going to be on October 28th on the Breakfast Club's YouTube channel.
Thank you to all of our guests and to you for watching. And a super special thanks to our Rocket Mortgage partners. Check out rocketmortgage.com/learn for the resources and tools that you need to get ready for home ownership. And don't forget to enter this contest for a chance to win $4,000 or other cash prizes. You have until October 2nd.
Thank you, everybody. We'll see you next time.